Hey there, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here today. If we haven't met before, I'm Pastor Josh Pontious, coming to you from Community of Grace Lutheran Church right here in Peoria, Arizona. It's wonderful to have you. If this is your first time joining us, welcome. We are at the tail end of this latest message series that we have been doing called Starting at the Beginning. And we have been going through the earliest parts of Genesis, some of those really cool stories. And we've got this one this week, Knowledge is Power, but Power Corrupts, talking about how people have tried to be like God and gain knowledge in that sense. We're talking today about the story of the Tower of Babel, or Babel, however you prefer to pronounce it. We are going to start something a little bit different. We're going to go right into the scripture as we get started this morning from the book of Genesis. Now the whole earth had one language and the same words. And as they migrated from the east, they came upon a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. And they said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly." And they had brick for stone and bitumen for mortar. Then they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens. And let us make a name for ourselves. Otherwise we shall be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth." The Lord came down to see the city and the tower which mortals had built. And the Lord said, "Look, they are one people, and they have all one language, and this is only the beginning of what they will do. Nothing that they propose to do now will be impossible for them. Come, let us go down and confuse their language there, so that they will not understand one another's speech." Now, there have been a number of interpretations of this story throughout histories. Now, skeptics will say this is just a mythology, some way to understand, for people to understand how different languages came to be with different people groups. And some believe it's a cautionary tale to not kind of lose humanity's place in the cosmic order of things. We are meant to stay down here and not try to go up to where God is in the heavens, to be like God, to get that knowledge that God has, and to not have our roles be mixed up with God's. And some say that this is a story about God's punishment for us and for our arrogance and our greed and our desire for greater power and greater prestige. And for still other people, this is just a bit of history. This is something that happened, and this is recorded for us to know and understand our place and our origins in the world. Which one of those interpretations is most true? Which one is most correct? I'd argue probably that there's elements of truth in every single one of those, and even more that we don't have time to discuss today. But I'd also argue that all of them are missing the most important point. Not because it's something that we need to try to interpret or suss out of the story. In fact, the most important thing is something that God says specifically. God says directly in this text. And while it's often seen as a kind of criticism of humanity, I think God is telling something very powerful to all of us with this one line. The Lord said, "Look, they are one people, and they have all one language. And this is the only the beginning of what they will do. Nothing that they propose to do now will be impossible for them." God straight up tells us, the people reading Genesis today, something incredible. If we are united in purpose and in cause, if we are actively communicating with one another in ways that are accessible for everyone, if we're united in a single language, all speaking the same things, if we have common goals, then there's nothing in this world that can stop us. And if those purposes that we are uniting together for aren't good ones, then like God sees it in our story today, then we're going to be in for some trouble. But I'd argue that done properly, this is God's reminder to us of all that we can accomplish together. Now, despite what superhero movies try to show us sometimes, it usually isn't a single hero or small group of heroes that end up saving the day in the real world. And we love our heroes. We really do. These imaginary ones from the comics and also the very real ones that live among us. This past week, we celebrated the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. here in America. And we know that this is a man that without a doubt had a profound impact on our nation and on our world. But Dr. King knew this powerful lesson from the book of Genesis. He knew that he wasn't going to be able to accomplish his calling from God alone. That his mission was not to single-handedly take down the systems of racism and injustice that had been perpetrated on people of African descent here in the United States over all of those generations. Dr. King knew it was only when people would rally, unite, and stand up against intolerance and hatred together with powerful language that everyone understood. They were all saying the same things, that they could be united in purpose, and that if they could do that together, only then could their goals ever even hope to be achieved. Now, so many people have come to me and to other faith leaders in the past couple years, and they despair. They look at a world that seems broken beyond repair, yet they know something needs to be done to create a more loving, more just, more free world. They come to me and they ask, what can I do? What is it that I need to be doing to help correct this messy, messed up world that we live in? My response is always a little bit different depending on the person and exactly what it is that they're hoping to address. But my response always includes this: don't try to do this alone. Our walk of faith isn't a solo activity, it's a team sport. There are people who are in this church who are right now ready to work with you and to accomplish these goals together. And there are other churches in our town, in our state, and in our nation that are willing to work together with us to accomplish some of these goals that we have together. And beyond that, there's also synagogues and mosques and other places of worship and government agencies and non-government agencies. Heck, even the local gardening club is probably willing to work together with us to accomplish some of these goals. The point isn't who we work together with, it's that we get to work on the right things. And so, of course, that always begs the question, how do we know if what we're doing is right? How do we know that when we're united in mission, that we're united in language, we're actually working towards something that is good? How do we definitely know that? Well, it's hard, but if it's something that's working to inflate our own egos, probably not it. If it's something that's working to get more recognition or more power or more wealth for us or for people like us, that's probably not it. If it's something that's used to create opportunity for some and not for others, that's probably not it either. If it puts down some and only lifts up a few, folks, that ain't it. But like I said last week, if we just stop and listen and follow God's call on our lives, if we take seriously God's scriptures and we go out united, man, incredible things can be done. And God speaks to what it is that we are supposed to be doing, those good things. First off, the prophet Micah tells us this: with what shall I come before the Lord and bow myself before God on high? Shall I come before him with burnt offerings, with calves a year old? Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams? With 10,000 rivers of oil shall I give my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? He has told you, O mortal, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you but to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God? And speaking of that, God also lays down the law in Deuteronomy. It says, for the Lord your God is God of gods and Lord of lords, the great God, mighty and awesome, who is not partial, takes no bribe, who executes justice for the orphan and the widow, and who loves strangers, providing them food and clothing. You shall also love the strangers, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. And then lastly, from the words of Jesus in Matthew's gospel, then the righteous will answer him, Lord, when was it we saw you hungry and gave you food, or thirsty and gave you something to drink? And when was it that we saw you a stranger and welcomed you, or naked and gave you clothing? And when was it that we saw you sick or in prison and visited you? And the king will answer them, truly I tell you, just as you did it to one of the least of these who are members of my family, you did it to me. If those are our guideposts, then that is our mission. To do justice and mercy, to welcome the outsider, to lift up the lowly, to feed the hungry, to visit those in prison, to help the outcast, to raise up those who are so often left behind. That is our calling. That is our mission. Not to work as individuals toiling away alone, but united in purpose and in mission, with a common language of love, grace, acceptance, and welcome, declaring that all people of all backgrounds, of all races, of all faiths, all identities and preferences and everything are all made in the incredible, beautiful image of God. To let them know that they're loved and cared for, and that the church here will stand with them and to stand for what is right. Our God has told us in this story that we can do anything if we are working together, and that all things are possible for us through our faith. So let's unite together in common mission, with common purpose, with common language of love, to bring goodness and grace from our God, not just for ourselves, but for a world that needs it. Grace from God our Father that so often loses its way. And we'll do it fueled for this journey that we're on of faith together, with the encouragement of our scriptures, with these reminders of God's promises, and fueled with this meal that we share together here in just a moment, to go be a transformative source of goodness and grace for the world. Amen.